everyone, and welcome to STEM Enrichment Molecular Biology live classes. Today we'll be going over cellular respiration.
So cellular respiration is a series of oxidative reactions by which cells gradually release energy stored in glucose and transfer it to molecules of ATP, also known as adenosine triphosphate. And the energy stored in ATP is immediately available for cellular activities such as contracting muscles, passing an impulse along a nerve, or pumping by active transport. The complete equation for aerobic respiration of one molecule of glucose is glucose plus oxygen gas with the products of water and ATP energy.
Okay, so ATP is a special high-energy molecule that stores energy for immediate use in the cell. And ATP structure consists of adenosine, which is the nucleotide adenine plus ribose, and it also has 3 phosphates. So the phosphates can be removed, and the removal of one phosphate group from ATP results in the formation of a more stable and lower energy molecule, ADP, or adenosine diphosphate. And when ATP is converted into ADP, energy is released. And when a phosphate group is added to ATP to produce ATP, energy is absorbed. And you can see the structure of ATP in the picture on the slide, and you can see the relationship between ATP, ADP, and energy.
Now I'll be going over the structure of mitochondria. So mitochondria is enclosed by two membranes, an outer membrane and an inner cristae membrane that is folded. This inner membrane divides the mitochondria into two compartments, the outer compartment and the matrix. The Krebs cycle takes place in the matrix, while the electron transport chain takes place on the cristae membrane. However, glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm outside of the mitochondria. Glycolysis is the anaerobic phase, so it doesn't require oxygen. In glycolysis, one molecule of glucose breaks apart into two molecules of pyruvate. Pyruvate or pyruvic acid is essentially one half of a glucose molecule, and it's the raw material for the next step, the Krebs cycle. Glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm of all cells, and it is a complex multi-step process. Each step is controlled by a different enzyme. Two molecules of ATP supply the energy of activation, which is the energy needed to begin the reaction, and it releases 4 ATP molecules, resulting in a net gain of 2 ATP. And this is the main equation, and you can see the basic diagram on the bottom.
All right, next we have the citric acid cycle, which is also known as the Krebs cycle. It is the first stage of the aerobic phase of cellular respiration. Pyruvate from glycolysis combines with coenzyme A, which is a vitamin derivative, to form acetyl-CoA, which enters the Krebs system, which is, as you can see in the diagram. This occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria. Each turn of the Krebs cycle produces one molecule of both ATP and FADH, plus 3 molecules of NADH. The byproduct is CO, which is exhaled.
So these are the steps of the citric acid cycle. Throughout the citric acid cycle, the starting molecule oxaloacetate is progressively transformed into several different molecules. And you can see between step 8 and step 1, we have the molecule, and then throughout the cycle, you can see it comes back. And this happens as carbon atoms are added and removed from it, but then at the end of the cycle, it always turns back into oxaloacetate to be used again. And energy can be captured from the cycle because several of the steps are energetically favorable, and the energy is stored in FADH and NADH molecules.
So the electron transport chain consists of a series of electron transporters located on the cristae membranes of mitochondria, which transport electrons. So the purpose of the electron transport chain is to establish a proton gradient. First, FADH2 and NADH transport highly energized electrons from the Krebs cycle to the electron transport chain. They lose their high energy electrons and become NAD plus and FAD, which can be reused in other steps of cellular respiration. Here in this picture, you can see where the outer membrane and the inner membrane of the mitochondria are located.
So as the highly energized electrons are pulled through the electron transport chain, the energy from this process powers the pumping of protons across the cristae membranes from the inner matrix to the outer compartment against their gradient. And at the end of the electron transport chain is oxygen, and oxygen has a strong attraction for electrons and protons, and it pulls the electrons through the electron transport chain, serving as the final electron and proton acceptor. And at the end of the electron transport chain, when oxygen combines with protons and electrons, water is formed and released as a waste product.
So once this gradient is formed, it's maintained because the protons can't flow back through the cristae membrane except for through special proton hydrogen channels called ATP synthase channels. And the proton gradient established by the electron transport chain powers the phosphorylation of ADP to ATP. And this can be compared to a hydroelectric plant because in the plant, when water flows over a dam, it turns turbines that transfer kinetic energy into electrical energy. And similarly, in the outer compartment of a mitochondria, when electrons flow down a gradient through ATP synthase channels, their potential energy is transferred to kinetic energy and then to chemical bond energy that is stored in the molecules of ATP. So then with each turn, ATP synthase generates ATP by adding phosphate to adenosine diphosphate, also known as ADP. And the production of ATP by this mechanism is called chemiosmosis or oxidative phosphorylation. And then that was a diagram.
Anaerobic respiration or fermentation consists of glycolysis plus either alcohol fermentation or lactic acid fermentation. Anaerobic respiration originated billions of years ago when there was no free oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. Alcohol fermentation is the process by which certain cells convert pruvic acid or privat from glycolysis into ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide in the absence of oxygen. Examples of organisms that do alcohol fermentation are yeast that carry out fermentation and produce the carbon dioxide. This is what causes bread to rise and also causes the production of beer and wine. Lactic acid fermentation occurs during exercise when the body cannot keep up with the increased demands for oxygen by skeletal muscles. Pruvic acid produced by glycolysis converts to lactic acid and builds up in muscles, causing fatigue and burning. When an increase in blood flow restores proper oxygen levels, lactic acid is removed from the muscles and carried to the liver, which is converted back to the pruvic acid.
Okay, so this is an overview of glycolysis, of cellular respiration. So the first step is glycolysis, and it produces 4 ATP. And the second step is the Krebs cycle, which produces 2 ATP. And the third step is electron transport phosphorylation, which produces 32 ATP. And the total is 36 ATP that is produced. Okay, so for homework, there will be a short quiz that you can do for an extra 20 points. And thank you guys for coming.